There's a chill in the air. My yarn is waiting, and I'm excited to get started on some new knitting projects. I'm sure you are too. During today's lesson, we're going to be talking about two different cast-on edges that are commonly used when knitting. The first one will be the LongTail Cast On, and the second will be our knitted cast on. And I'll talk a little bit about how to do those and some of the pros and cons to each one. So if you're ready, so am I. Let's get started. So let's begin with our LongTail Cast On. I'm going to begin by showing you how to do the cast on, and then we will be talking a little bit about ways to estimate how long of a tail to use. One of the good things about the LongTail Cast On is it can be used to start just about any knitting project, and it works well with all weights of yarn. It's also a very elastic cast on, so it works well with projects such as hats or sweaters where you need something to be a little bit stretchy around the bottom. So I'm going to begin by making a slip knot. Now I have my tail and my slip knot. I'll be putting that on the tip of my needle. Now this is the tail end, and I'm going to be having that closest to me, the ball end away from me. I'm going to be grabbing those two strands of yarn with my ring finger and my pinky, separating the two strands with my index finger and my thumb, and pulling it down towards my palm. With the tip of my needle, I'm going to pick up this first strand that's over around my thumb. I'm going to be coming underneath it. I'm going to go over the top of the yarn that's going over my index finger, pulling it through, and dropping my thumb. I use my thumb to help tighten that up around my needle, and then I'm ready to begin again. So I'm going to bring that needle down. With the tip, pick up the first strand of yarn, come over the top, pick up the first strand coming over my pinky, drop it down, release my thumb, and pull it away. Bringing it down, come underneath my thumb, over the top, pick it up, and drop it. And let's do it one more time. Come underneath, over the top, pull it through, drop my thumb. So that's the LongTail Cast On. Now, some of the problems that people have with LongTail Cast On is estimating the amount of yarn that you need for your tail. So there's a couple of different ways. One is that you can wrap your yarn around your needle the number of stitches that you need to cast on. Well, that works great if you have, say, 20 or 30 stitches. But if you're casting on 200, it gets a little tedious. So you can do a little bit of math to make that a little easier. First, you can wrap your yarn around your needle, say 10 times, and get a good estimate of the length of your yarn. 4, 6, 8, 9, and 10. So then I'm going to pull that off of my needle. And I'm going to say that this is going to be about the length that I need for 10 stitches. So if I'm casting on, say, 90 stitches, if I multiply this distance, and it's about a foot, by 9, that will tell me approximately how much yarn I need for my LongTail Cast On. I always leave a little extra just in case I cast on a little looser than I did my wraps. So that works pretty well. There's also another one that involves some math, which it's an estimate that you can use about 1 inch of yarn per stitch. That works well if it's a average needle size of about a 6, 7. But when you get into the larger needle sizes, that doesn't necessarily calculate out. So you might need to leave some extra yarn. A friend of mine also showed me another way in which you can use the longtail cast on. And I find this way to work really well if you have a yarn cake, such as this one, where you can pull from the inside and the outside. This is really a wonderful way to be able to use the longtail cast on, because you don't have to calculate how much you need for that tail. The bad thing is you have a couple of extra ends to weave in at the end. So I guess you have to weigh the pros and cons of what you like to do or not. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave approximately 6 inches of distance from the beginning of my yarn to where I'm going to put my slip knot. So I'm going to hold the 2 ends, one I pulled from the center of my cake and one from the outside. I'm going to hold them together and I'm going to tie a slip knot. I'm going to go ahead and put that on my needle as if I was going to do a regular longtail cast on. Now I have these 2 ends, which in the end I will have to weave those in. I have 2 slip knots over the end of my needle. Now I'm going to tell you what we're going to do with those as we get our cast on going. I'm going to go ahead and grab those 2 strands as if they were a regular longtail cast on with my pinky and index finger. I'm going to separate those 2 strands with my index finger and my thumb and go ahead and do my longtail cast on. I'm going to be casting on 10 stitches plus the slip knot at the end, which will make 11. So I'm going to be casting on 11 stitches. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have my slip knot and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I need to do one more for 10. Now, depending on whether you like to pull your yarn from the center of your cake or from the outside will determine which one of these strands here you will cut. But you will cut one, which I'm not going to do right now, but you will cut one and then continue knitting with the other one. So I'm going to pretend to cut this one. I'm going to be knitting with this one. I'm going to knit back across to the slip knot, and so I can show you what we're going to do with the slip knot. I'll knit all of my stitches except for the slip knot. I'm going to drop the slip knot, give it a pull, and it goes away. And then I have my 10 stitches and I'm ready to keep knitting on my project. So to me, that is the best way to be able to work with a longtail cast on. If you don't have a cake, you can either use 2 different balls or do the math that I instructed you at the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about some of the drawbacks of the longtail cast on. We talked about how to estimate the tail. Make sure that when you're doing your longtail cast on that you make sure your tension is even throughout. And also, if your cast on edge is followed by the stockinette stitch, sometimes it won't lay flat, it will roll to the knit side. So those are just some of the drawbacks of that longtail cast on. But to me, it's my favorite go-to, and I begin nearly all my projects with it. The next cast on I'm going to talk to you about is the knitted cast on. So give me a minute here, I'll get rid of some of this. So the knitted cast on, a lot of people like because they don't have to estimate a tail. But you begin with the amount that you're going to need to weave in the end. Go ahead and make your slip knot. And put it on your needle. Now you're going to hold it as if you were going to be knitting. Now, just as a reminder, I knit continental method, so I hold my yarn in my left hand. But I'm going to just knit my first stitch. And instead of dropping this stitch off the needle, I'm going to take this one and set it back on the needle and tighten it up. And then again, I'm just going to knit the next stitch. I won't drop it off the needle, but I'm going to put this stitch on the tip. And continue knitting and placing. And that's how that stitch works. It's very, very nice. It's easy to remember. It can be used to start just about any projects, or you can use it to add stitches in the middle of your knitting. It's a fairly elastic, and it works well with all weights of yarn. Some of the drawbacks of this particular cast on is it can stretch out of shape easily, and so your cast on edge tends to be a little bit looser. But it's an easy one to remember, and you can cast on a whole lot of stitches without having to worry about a tail. So the last thing I'm going to be showing you is how to cast on in the middle of a garment. Now you can use the knitted cast on that I showed you. There's also another one that is very easy to do. And so I have a project here that I'm making like a buttonhole. And so I've cast on, or I've bound off some stitches here in the middle. And so where I've bound off here, I need to add stitches back on the other side. So the way to do that is I take my finger and I make a little bit of a loop, so by coming underneath my yarn and twisting it. I put my needle in from front to back and twist that. Then you can see how the yarn wraps over the needle, comes through the center of the yarn, and when I give it a little tug, it creates a wrap. So once again, I bring my index finger, I come underneath my yarn, I give it a little twist. With the tip of my needle, I come in front to back, and I actually twist that yarn. Comes over the top of my needle and in between, like that. And that's how you can cast on stitches in the middle of a garment. So I think that it's really an effective way. It's very fast. It can be a little loose, so just keep that in mind if you're using that for a cast on edge of a garment, which you can use, but I prefer to use it on inside a garment when I'm using it for buttonholes or something. So I hope that these have been helpful for you. I will be doing another lesson on how to do the provincial cast on, which is used for Mobius or the toes of socks. So stay tuned, and we'll be talking about that in my next lesson.